Joining me now in the Toyota Solutions studio is Tamika Mallory, who is really a star, I'd say, of the modern civil rights movement, and she was also the national co-chair of the historic Women's March. Tamika, it's such a pleasure to have you in the studio. Thanks for making time in your busy day. Let's go back to the march. And you must have been on such a high after the success of it. What has happened since then? What have you been up to?
Well, you know, first I want to say that high lasted for just a few moments, and on the stage I quickly became very sad. And I'll tell you why. Because as I looked out in the audience and saw all these people who were coming into D.C. who were like really afraid that, like, oh my God, what happened? Donald Trump became president and the world went crazy. It occurred to me that if I had died, the same people would not have been there, right? That people would not have been moved to be present in the movement and have not been moved to be present in the movement for issues that existed well before Donald Trump. And so today, when you say, what have we been doing? We've been encouraging people that we don't leave us. We need you to stay involved, and we need you to understand that your activism cannot start with Donald Trump and end there, because therefore you will leave a whole lot on the table that we're still trying to address that Donald Trump really is not the leader of.
And like you said, you had been fighting for a lot of social justice, criminal justice, gun control issues, issues that matter to women since you were like 15.
Exactly. And to that point, that's what I mean by if I had died. If I was Sandra Bland, you know, who died in a cell for a traffic light switching that she may or may not have been right or wrong. Maybe she committed suicide. Maybe she was killed. Who knows? But the point is that she died over something this small. And people did not turn out in the streets in the way that we saw on January 21st. Yet that was equally important because someone's life was taken and it mattered.
And yet, and look, I can be the cynical journalist, and yet on that day, something really good happened, right? I mean, you can't argue with that.
Absolutely.
As an organizer, what do you do to continue to mobilize all of those key players?
Right. Well, I think that this time period that we're in, it's like you can't pay for a better motivator than ever for people to be involved in the movement. There are a plethora of issues that folks are feeling really, want to be engaged in. They want to fight back. They do not want to roll over. And I think what is amazing is that women are at the helm of pushing back on these issues, whether it be the Muslim ban, whether it be us deporting undocumented people, whether it be all the things that are happening still, police brutality, criminal justice reform. We now have women who are stepping up saying, I'm going to run for office. I'm going to demand from those people in power that they listen to my voice. We're going to get on the phone and call and say, you better not vote yes on the Affordable Care, getting rid of the Affordable Care Act.
And that was
effective. Look at what
clearly.
happened. It was actually effective, right? And we know that over 1,000 women have decided to run for office since the Women's March on Washington. So many beautiful things have happened. And we're excited that people are getting involved in the movement. And we hope that folks will take the opportunity to educate themselves on movements that existed before so that we can take a page out of those books and look at how we don't make the mistakes of the past where feminism did not necessarily represent women of color, but that we use all the success and then build on it to make a stronger movement.
What is the intersection? I understand your parents were really active in the civil rights movement, so this is like in your blood. Talk about the intersection between the criminal justice, the gun control issues, and the women's movement that we've seen. What is the intersection there?
Well, I think that if women don't understand the importance of being involved in all those issues, that's problematic. This is what I mean by, you know, feminism being very, very fragile for some people. The conversation is difficult because people do not necessarily feel like their issue is a part of that conversation. What do I mean? Reproductive rights. So some women look at reproductive rights as an issue related to abortion and birth control and those issues, but there are other women who are afraid to even have children because they don't know whether their children will be safe. That is also a reproductive rights issue. If your equal pay issue is that I want as a white woman to be making the same as a white man, what about the fact that women of color are not even making equal to white women? So you actually have to look at, when we talk about intersectionality, these issues from those who are the most disadvantaged heritage that come from the most marginalized communities. And as you lift those people, then and only then will we be able to have what looks like true equity and then equality.
And it's not like a zero-sum game,
no,
right?
It's
where
not.
you can't talk about contraception and reproductive rights and not
not.
also
because
talk
we
about
care about that too.
Right. But
right?
Is there ever a concern that it all becomes too much, that you put all the issues out there, you put all the issues in the basket? When I was looking at the agenda for the Women's March, I thought, okay, which of these do I really stand for and do really resonate with me, and which of these don't?
Right.
I mean, do you know what I'm asking?
But I'm sure you found a place, right?
I certainly found a place.
And most people did.
Right.
So if we would have had a march and the agenda was very narrow focused, someone would have been excluded. And that's what I mean by, us not making the mistakes of the past. Because we know that feminism and the women's movement of the past clearly excluded certain groups of people who folks did not feel were a part of what feminism meant. There was classism in that in itself. And so our purpose, women of color being centered, Carmen Perez, Linda Sarsour, being centered in this march and in the planning as co-chairs, was to ensure that everyone's issues was on the table. So we did talk about reproductive rights from one particular perspective, but we also covered the perspective of other people who have not been a part of the conversation.
And you talked about immigration.
And we talked about immigration.
Yeah.
We also made sure that the Native American community was able to come and talk about the Dakota Access Pipeline and how, once again, Native American people are being moved around and disenfranchised in America. We allowed a woman who was incarcerated for over 20 years to come and speak about the issues of mass incarceration. Those things would not have happened if it had not been for the fact that women of color who've actually been and lived these experiences and fought with these particular communities were at the center of the conversation.
You have talked about politics and women needing to get into politics. That's something that Secretary Hillary Clinton has also talked about devoting more time to. What about yourself? Clearly you have a platform and you have a following. Do you have ambitions to run for office?
Not right now, because I'm raising hell. And sometimes when you become when you work for the government, you got to be a little bit more sensible. And right now, I could just say whatever the hell I want. So.
And you have during this summit. Tamika Mallory, more power to you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.